Imagine a grief so profound it could silence the birds, wither ancient oaks, and make the very stones weep. We have all experienced loss, that sudden, echoing emptiness when someone we love is taken away. But how far would you go to get them back? Would you walk into the darkest abyss? Would you defy the laws of nature, of life and death itself, armed with nothing but a song? This is not just a myth about gods and monsters. It is the ultimate story of human desperation, the agonizing fragility of trust, and a love so powerful it forced the gates of hell to open. This is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, the most beautiful and the most devastating love story ever told. Join us as we journey into the underworld to uncover the truth behind this timeless tragedy. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales that explore the depths of human emotion. Long before the empires of men carved borders across the earth, in the rugged, wild mountains of Thrace, there lived a boy whose voice was a force of nature. His name was Orpheus. To understand Orpheus, you must understand that he was not merely a musician. Music, in the modern sense, is entertainment. For Orpheus, music was magic. It was a tangible, breathing power. His lineage dictated nothing less. His mother was Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, the whispered inspiration behind the greatest tales ever told. His father, Dependent, on which ancient whispers you choose to believe, was either a Thracian king or Apollo himself, the god of light, truth, and music. It was Apollo who gifted the young Orpheus his first lyre, a beautiful instrument crafted from a hollowed tortoise shell. But a divine instrument is nothing without a master. When Orpheus plucked the strings, the world fundamentally changed. The ancient Greeks believed that his melodies were so intoxicating, so perfectly attuned to the hidden frequencies of the universe, that the natural world had no choice but to surrender. When Apliged, the rushing, violent rivers of Thrace would slow their currents, pausing just to listen, the towering oak and ash trees would physically uproot themselves, their massive roots dragging across the soil, inching closer to the boys so they might catch every note. Even the fiercest beasts of the forest, wolves, bears, and mountain lions would abandon their primal instincts. They would emerge from the shadows of the woods and lie peacefully at his feet, subdued by the sheer, unearthly beauty of his song. Orpheus lived in a world of absolute harmony. He was a golden child, beloved by gods and mortals alike. He traveled with the legendary Argonauts, saving them from the deadly, hypnotic calls of the sirens simply by playing a melody so grand, so majestic, that it drowned out their fatal seduction. To look at his life was to look at a tapestry woven with pure gold. There was no conflict he could not resolve with a chord, no sorrow he could not heal with a verse. Yet, despite this absolute mastery over the world around him, Orpheus's life was entirely incomplete. His music, for all its miraculous power, lacked a soul. It was technically perfect, but it had not yet known the profound depths of human passion. He had the voice of a god, but the heart of a mortal. And that mortal heart was waiting. It was waiting for a muse of its own. It was waiting for the day he would wander into the deep, sun-dappled forests of his homeland and set his eyes upon a creature of such effortless grace that he would finally understand what his music had been preparing him for all his life. He was waiting for Eurydice. She was an Aloniad, a nymph of the mountain pastures and deep glens. Her name was Eurydice. Unlike the grand, imposing deities of Mount Olympus, the nymphs were the spirit of the earth itself, bound to the rustling leaves, the clear streams, and the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy. She possessed a beauty that was entirely unforced, as natural and breathtaking as a sudden spring bloom after a harsh, unforgiving winter. The stories do not tell us exactly where their eyes first met. Perhaps it was beside a quiet, babbling stream, or in a sunlit clearing where she danced barefoot among the wildflowers. But what is certain is that from the moment Orpheus saw her, the golden boy of Thrace was forever changed. His lyre, which had once commanded the trees and the rivers, now felt utterly inadequate in his hands. The melodies he had played for kings and heroes suddenly seemed hollow compared to the sound of her laughter. For the first time in his life, the greatest musician in the world found himself entirely at a loss for notes. Their love was immediate, absolute, and all-consuming. It was a union that felt preordained by the fates themselves. When Orpheus finally found the courage to play for her, his music transformed. It was no longer just beautiful. It was profound, It carried the warmth of the summer sun and the quiet intimacy of a shared secret. Eurydice became his entire world, the living, breathing center of his universe. Every song he composed was a tribute to her eyes, her smile, her gentle spirit. In her, he found the missing chord that made his soul complete. It wasn't long before they decided to bind their lives together. The wedding of Orpheus and Eurydice was meant to be a celebration unlike any other. The greatest musician of the age marrying the most beautiful nymph of the forest. Friends, mortals, and woodland spirits gathered in the verdant meadows of Thrace to witness their vows. But the ancient world was ruled by gods who were notoriously jealous of perfect human happiness. A dark, unseen cloud hung heavily over the festivities. Hymen, the god of marriage ceremonies, was summoned to bless the union. It was his duty to carry the bridal torch, a symbol of a bright, enduring future. But when Hymen arrived, his demeanor was grim. He brought no joyful chants, no cheerful blessings, and worse, the torch he carried refused to burn with a clear, steady flame. Instead, it sputtered violently. It hissed and smoked, casting long, menacing shadows across the faces of the guests. Thick, acrid black smoke choked the air, bringing stinging tears to the eyes of those who stood near. In the ancient world, there was no clearer, more terrifying omen. The sputtering torch was a warning from the divine violent premonition that this beautiful, perfect love was destined to be swallowed by an inescapable darkness. The bliss of the newlyweds was fragile, a brief, shining moment destined to be violently shattered. The tragic turning point came on a day that began like any other, under the bright, unforgiving Mediterranean sun. Eurydice, accompanied by her fellow naiads, was wandering through the tall grasses of a riverbank. She was gathering spring flowers, weaving them together, her mind undoubtedly filled with thoughts of her new husband and the beautiful life they were just beginning to build together. But they were not alone in the meadow. From the shadows of the dense tree line, they were being watched. Aristeus, a minor deity and a keeper of bees, had been observing Eurydice. Consumed by a sudden, overwhelming lust, he stepped out from the brush. His intentions were clear, and his advance was unyielding. Panic seized Eurydice. She was a creature of the forest, swift and agile, and her immediate instinct was flight. She dropped her gathered flowers and ran, her bare feet pounding against the soft earth, her heart hammering wildly in her chest as Aristeus gave chase. She ran with a desperate, breathless terror, glancing back over her shoulder just for a fraction of a second to see if her pursuer was gaining ground. It was this singular, panicked moment of distraction that sealed her doom. In her desperate sprint for safety, she did not see what lay hidden in the thick, sun-baked grass directly in her path. A venomous viper, disturbed from its quiet rest, coiled and struck with lightning speed. The fangs sank deep into her delicate ankle. The pain was instantaneous and searing. Eurydice let out a sharp cry, stumbling and falling heavily to the ground. The venom of the viper was swift and uncompromising. It raced through her veins, a cold, dark tide rapidly extinguishing the vibrant light of her life. Aristeus, realizing the horror of what had happened, fled in cowardly terror, leaving the young bride completely alone in the tall grass. By the time her fellow nymphs reached her side, it was too late. The life had completely drained from her eyes. The beautiful Oloniad was gone. The news reached Orpheus. Not long after, when he found her lifeless body, the world stopped turning. The profound, suffocating silence that follows sudden death descended upon the forest. For Orpheus, the golden boy who could control the very fabric of nature, this was a reality he could not comprehend. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he gently touched her cold cheek. He did not scream. He did not rage against the heavens. Instead, he picked up his lyre, but the music that flowed from his fingers was no longer the harmonious magic that tamed the beasts. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was a lament so deeply sorrowful, so agonizingly tragic, that the entire world wept with him. The nymphs of the woods and rivers wailed. The gods themselves, looking down from Olympus, felt a heavy ache in their immortal chests. Grief is a strange and terrifying thing. For most mortals, it brings a slow, crushing acceptance of an inescapable reality. But for Orpheus, Acceptance was an absolute impossibility. He had spent his entire life commanding the natural world with his art. If his music could move the immovable roots of ancient oak trees, if it could soothe the savage hearts of mountain lions and alter the course of raging rivers, why could it not move the hearts of the gods below? Why could it not bridge the ultimate, terrifying divide between the living and the dead? In the depths of his agonizing sorrow, a dangerous, unprecedented thought took root in his mind. He would not wait for his own death to reunite with Eurydice. He would go to her now. He would walk directly into the suffocating, sunless domain of Hades, the lord of the underworld, and he would demand his bride back. It was a suicide mission, an act of sheer, unparalleled madness. No mortal had ever ventured into the realm of the dead while still breathing and returned to tell the tale, armed with nothing but his hollowed tortoiseshell lyre and a heart heavy with unbearable grief. Orpheus traveled to the southern tip of the Peloponnese. There, hidden among jagged, unforgiving rocks and shrouded in eternal mist, lay the cave of Tanarumwan, of the legendary, treacherous entrances to the underworld. As he stepped over the threshold, leaving the vibrant world of the living behind, the warmth of the Mediterranean sun instantly vanished. It was replaced by a biting, supernatural cold that seeped directly into his bones. The descent was a nightmare of the senses. The air grew impossibly thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth, decay, and the sharp temps of sulfur. The jagged walls of the subterranean caverns seemed to close in around him, whispering with the faint, disembodied sighs of millions of lost souls. Shadows writhed and twisted in the eternal, oppressive twilight, taking the shapes of forgotten horrors. The silence of the abyss was deafening, a heavy weight that pressed against his chest, threatening to crush his resolve. Yet, Orpheus did not falter. He did not turn back toward the light. He simply gripped his lyre tighter and continued his downward march into the abyss. He was driven by a love that absolutely refused to acknowledge the boundary of death, a stubborn, beautiful arrogance that only a grieving heart could possess. He was a lone spark of golden light, descending deliberately into an ocean of absolute, crushing darkness, entirely prepared to challenge the fundamental laws of the universe for the woman he loved. After days of descending through the winding, labyrinthine caverns of the earth, Orpheus finally reached the edge of the river Styx. This was the absolute boundary of the afterlife, a poisonous, sluggish expanse of black water that permanently separated the vibrant world of the living from the final, silent resting place of the dead. On muddy, desolate banks stood thousands of pale, shivering spirits, moaning softly, waiting desperately for a passage they could not afford. Cutting through the murky, foul-smelling mist was the grim ferryman, Charon. He was a terrifying, skeletal figure draped in tattered, rotting robes, his eyes burning like dying coals in the sockets of his skull. Charon's rule was absolute and ancient. He only accepted the dead, and only those buried with a gold coin beneath their tongue to pay the toll. When he saw the living, breathing Orpheus step onto the muddy bank, his heart still beating loudly in his chest, the ferryman raised his massive wooden oar in a violent, silent refusal. But Orpheus did not reach for a coin. He reached for his lyre. He struck a single, resonant chord that echoed powerfully across the desolate, weeping shores. He began to sing of his profound heartbreak, of a love violently stolen by the fangs of a viper, of the agonizing, suffocating emptiness of the world above. The melody was so pure, so incredibly devastating, that the impossible happened. The damned souls on the banks ceased their eternal weeping, turning in silent awe. The sluggish, black waters of the Styx seemed to pause their eternal flow, and Charon, the ancient, merciless ferryman who had witnessed millennia of human suffering without ever shedding a single tear, found his skeletal hands trembling against the wood of his oar. The music pierced through his hardened, immortal shell. Without a single word, he lowered his oar, stepped aside, and motioned for the living boy to step onto his skiff. The ferry glided silently across the dark water, depositing Orpheus on the opposite shore. But the ultimate physical test still awaited. Guarding the massive adamantine gates of hell was Cerberus the monstrous, three-headed hound, whose deafening, blood-curdling roars shook the very foundations of the underworld. Venom dripped in thick pools from his three maws, and his mane writhed with hissing, venomous snakes. As Orpheus approached the gates, the beast lunged forward, the chains straining, ready to tear the fragile mortal to bloody shreds. Once again, Orpheus let his fingers dance across the strings. The frantic, terrifying barks of the hellhound slowly turned into confused, pathetic whimpers. The aggressive, discordant noise of hell was completely overpowered by the beautiful, soothing, rhythmic lullaby of the lyre. Slowly, one by one, the three massive, terrifying heads of Cerberus drooped. His heavy eyelids fluttered and closed, and the massive monster collapsed to the cavern floor, lulled into a deep, peaceful slumber. The gates of hell stood wide open. Orpheus walked carefully past the heavily breathing sleeping hound and stepped into the sprawling, desolate plains of Asgard. He moved with quiet determination, drawing ever closer to the dark heart of the underworld. The air here was entirely still, devoid of any wind, warmth, or hope. Finally, rising from the gloom like a jagged nightmare, he stood before the towering, imposing palace of Hades. The architecture was terrifying and grand, built entirely from cold obsidian and hardened shadows, designed specifically to crush the spirit of any soul that entered. He pushed open the massive iron doors and walked slowly into the grand throne room. The atmosphere was incredibly oppressive, thick with the scent of ancient dust and cold stone. Sitting upon thrones of bone and dark gold were the ultimate, terrifying rulers of this realm. Hades, the stern, unyielding lord of the dead, possessed a face carved from pale, emotionless marble, entirely devoid of mercy or pity. Beside him sat Persephone, his beautiful, melancholic queen, her dark eyes reflecting the profound sorrow of a woman who intimately knew what it meant to be violently torn from the sunlit world above. The entire court fell dead silent as the living boy approached the foot of the thrones. The Furies, the terrifying goddesses of vengeance, with vipers for hair and whips of fire, paused their eternal, bloody tortures. Deep in the pit of Tartarus, Tantalus forgot his unending, agonizing thirst. Ixion's flaming wheel ground to a sudden halt. Sisyphus let his massive, crushing boulder rest halfway up the hill. Every single entity in the vast, echoing underworld turned their gaze toward the golden boy of Thrace. Orpheus did not bow. He did not fall to his knees and plead with empty, desperate words. He knew that logic, begging, or threats meant absolutely nothing in this realm of absolute, terrifying finality. He had only one weapon, the only language he truly understood. He brought his lyre close to his chest, closed his eyes to summon the vibrant image of Eurydice, laughing in the sunlit meadow, and began to play. This was not just a song. It was the ultimate culmination of his entire existence. He poured every ounce of his shattered soul, every single drop of his unbearable, suffocating grief into the music. He sang of the profound cruelty of fate, of a beautiful life, cut tragically short before it could truly bloom. He sang of the agonizing, silent loneliness of an empty bed, and the desperate, burning desire just to hold his wife's hand one last time. The melody swelled with devastating power, echoing off the obsidian walls, piercing through the suffocating darkness, and for the first time in the history of the universe, bringing tears to the eyes of the Lord of the Dead. As the final shivering note of the lyre slowly faded into the oppressive gloom, an impossible heavy silence blanketed the grand throne room. The echoes of his heartbreaking lament lingered in the cold air, clinging to the obsidian pillars like a desperate prayer. For the very first time since the dawn of creation, the realm of the dead was completely paralyzed by the sheer beauty of human sorrow. Persephone, the queen of the underworld, sat frozen on her throne of dark gold. Slowly, a single, glistening tear escaped her dark eyes, tracing a path down her pale cheek. Her mind had been violently pulled back to the sunlit meadows of her youth, remembering the agonizing warmth of a world she was forced to leave behind. She leaned toward her husband, her hand gently resting on his arm, silently pleading for a mercy that did not exist in this realm. Hades, the stern, unyielding lord of the dead, whose heart was supposedly forged from the impenetrable bedrock of the earth itself, looked down at the mortal boy. His marble-like features remained rigid, but something ancient and immovable had shifted behind his hollow eyes. The music had found the smallest, most hidden crack in his immortal armor. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates, resonant and vibrating with a terrifying, absolute authority that shook the dust from the cavern ceiling. "You have achieved the impossible, son of Thrace," Hades declared, the sound echoing endlessly into the void. "You have moved the immovable, you have brought the warmth of the sun into the abyss, and you have reminded the dead of what it means to truly feel." He paused, the silence stretching out, taut and fragile as a book. "Your bride, Eurydice, shall be returned to you. I will allow her soul to follow you out of this suffocating darkness and back into the vibrant world of the breathing." A wave of overwhelming, blinding relief washed over Orpheus. Had done Italiano. He had literally conquered death with nothing but a song. But the gods of the underworld are ancient, and they never give a gift without demanding a severe, almost insurmountable price. Hades leaned forward, the shadows lengthening around his crown, his gaze piercing directly through the young musician's soul. "But there is a condition," the Lord of the Dead warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, whispering rumble. "A single, unbreakable rule. She will walk behind you on the long, treacherous ascent back to the surface. You must lead the way, and you must trust the dark. Under no circumstances may you turn around to look at her until you have both fully crossed the threshold into the light of the living. If you doubt me, if you allow your impatience to break your gaze forward for even a fraction of a second, the bargain is instantly broken. She will be pulled back into the abyss, and she will be ours forever. You will never see her again." The bargain was struck. Orpheus bowed his head in profound gratitude, turned his back on the towering thrones of the dead, and began the terrifying, arduous journey back to the surface. The initial surge of adrenaline and triumphant joy fueled his first steps. He had stared down the ultimate, terrifying finality of human existence and negotiated a miracle. All he had to do was walk. All he had to do was put one foot in front of the other, keep his eyes locked straight ahead, and trust that the love of his life was quietly trailing in his wake. It sounded so incredibly simple, but as he moved further away from the throne room and deeper into the winding, claustrophobic tunnels of the earth, the true psychological horror of the bargain began to reveal itself. The path upward was steep, jagged, and cloaked in an absolutely impenetrable, suffocating blackness. And worst of all, it was entirely, maddeningly silent. The spirits of the dead do not possess physical bodies. They have no weight, they draw no breath, and their footsteps make absolutely no sound upon the gravel. Hours bled into what felt like days, and the silence began to gnaw at the edges of Orpheus's sanity. Without the sensory confirmation of her presence, without the soft rustle of her dress, the warmth of her breath, or the gentle cadence of her voice, a dark, creeping seed of doubt was planted in his mind. The underworld is a place designed to break the human spirit, and the oppressive darkness began to actively play terrifying tricks on him. Is she really there? The shadows seemed to whisper, slithering into his ears. Why would the Lord of the Dead willingly give up a soul? Gods do not deal fairly with mortals. They are cruel. They are tricksters. Hades is likely sitting on his obsidian throne right now, laughing at the foolish golden boy marching completely alone toward the surface, talking to an empty void. The psychological torment was agonizing, far worse than any physical pain he had ever endured. The temptation to simply glance back over his shoulder, just a fleeting, microsecond look to reassure his violently trembling heart, became a physical ache. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to confirm that he had not been deceived. He pictured her stumbling in the dark, reaching out for his hand, confused as to why he wouldn't look at her. The burden of trust was crushing him. He was a man used to controlling his environment through his art, used to seeing the immediate, tangible results of his actions. Now, he was completely powerless, forced to rely on blind, absolute faith in a realm built entirely on deception and despair. He gripped his lyre until his knuckles turned bone-white, desperately humming his own melodies just to drown out the maddening, screaming silence behind him. The torturous climb stretched his physical and mental endurance to its absolute, breaking limit. He was exhausted, shivering from the supernatural cold and half-mad with the agonizing paranoia of his own mind. But then, after what felt like an eternity wandering through a sunless purgatory, the atmosphere began to subtly shift. The oppressive, sulphurous stench of decay slowly thinned out, replaced by the faint, crisp scent of morning dew and pine needles. The air grew lighter, losing its suffocating, damp density. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw it. Far above, cutting through the jagged, looming rocks of the cavern tunnel, was a faint, bruised, purple glow. It was the very first promise of dawn. The exit. The cave of Tanarum was finally in sight. A sudden, violent surge of renewed energy shot through Orpheus's exhausted muscles. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs, beating a frantic rhythm of pure, unadulterated hope. He accelerated his pace, his boots scrambling frantically over the loose stones. The ambient light grew stronger with every step, shifting from purple to a soft, hazy gray, and finally to the brilliant, blinding gold of the Mediterranean sun. He could hear the distant, sweet chirping of birds. He could feel the actual warmth of the living world brushing against his tear-stained face. He was inches away from a miracle. With one final, desperate lunge, Orpheus crossed the rocky threshold. He stepped out of the gaping mouth of the cave and directly into the glorious, blinding embrace of the morning light. He had done Italiana. He had beaten the gods. He had shattered the absolute boundary of life and death. And he was finally home, in a massive rush of overwhelming, intoxicating joy and absolute relief. A fatal, tragic lapse in judgment consumed him. The psychological torture of the dark evaporated in the sun, replaced by an uncontrollable, desperate hunger to see her face. He was standing in the light. He was safe. But in his frantic euphoria, he had forgotten the exact, meticulous wording of the Lord of the Dead. The bargain wasn't that he had to reach the light. The bargain dictated that he could not look back until they were both fully immersed in the sun. Unable to wait a single second longer, a triumphant, tearful smile breaking across his face, Orpheus spun around with his arms wide open to embrace his bride. And for one beautiful, agonizing fraction of a second, he saw her. Eurydice was there. She was standing just inside the mouth of the cave, her foot raised to take the final step across the threshold. But the sunlight had not yet touched her. As his eyes locked onto hers, the triumphant smile on his face froze, and the world violently stopped turning. The moment his eyes met hers, the absolute horror of his mistake crashed down upon him with the weight of a collapsing mountain. Eurydice was standing right there, suspended in the threshold between the suffocating darkness of the underworld and the brilliant, golden light of the living. For one agonizing, eternal heartbeat, they looked at one another. He saw the soft, familiar curve of her cheek, the gentle, melancholic depth of her eyes. He had done the impossible. He had brought her back from the abyss. But the sunlight had not yet touched her skin. He had broken the absolute, unyielding law of the Lord of the Dead. There was no sudden crack of thunder, no dramatic, booming voice from the heavens to announce his failure. The punishment of the gods was far more intimate and infinitely more cruel. As Orpheus reached his hand out, desperate to pull her the rest of the way into the sun, her physical form began to blur. The edges of her silhouette dissolved into wisps of cold, gray mist. The physics of the underworld violently reclaimed what belonged to it. An invisibly irresistible force gripped her soul, yanking her violently backward into the crushing, eternal dark. Eurydice did not scream. She did not reach out to claw at the stone walls, nor did she curse him for his fatal impatience. As the shadows rapidly swallowed her, her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow and gentle forgiveness. The ancient Roman poet Ovid wrote that her final word to him was a barely audible whisper, a soft, echoing farewell, before she was violently pulled away into the abyss. And just like that, the cavern was empty. The air grew still. The morning birds continued their ignorant, cheerful songs outside. And Orpheus was left standing completely alone in the blinding light, his arms wrapped around nothing but empty air. He had lost her, and this time it was not the fault of a hidden viper, a cowardly deity, or a cruel twist of fate. This time, he had lost her purely because of his own desperate, agonizing, human frailty. His love, The very thing that had given him the miraculous strength to conquer hell was the exact weapon that destroyed him. He fell to his knees on the hard, jagged rocks, a guttural, primal scream tearing from his throat, echoing violently down into the black depths of the earth, unanswered forever. Driven completely mad by a grief so immense it fractured his reality, Orpheus scrambled frantically back down into the terrifying depths of the cave of Tenerife. He retraced his steps through the suffocating dark, his hands bleeding from the jagged walls, his voice hoarse from screaming her name until his throat tasted of copper. He ran until he reached the muddy, desolate banks of the river Styx once more. But the underworld is a realm of absolute finality, and miracles are only granted once. Charon, the skeletal ferryman, stood tall upon his skiff, his eyes burning like dead coals. Orpheus raised his lyre, his trembling fingers desperately striking the chords, begging for passage. But the music had lost its divine, persuasive magic. It was jagged, broken, and hollow. The Lord of the Dead had given his word, and Orpheus had shattered the bargain. The ferryman did not lower his oar. He simply stared at the broken boy with cold, uncompromising apathy. For 7 straight days and 7 endless nights, Orpheus sat on the foul-smelling banks of the Styx. He refused food, he refused water, and he refused to sleep, desperately hoping the gods would take pity on his pathetic state. But the heavens remained silent, and the gates of hell remained firmly shut. Finally, entirely broken and physically hollowed out, he dragged himself back to the surface. He returned to the wild, rugged mountains of Thrace. But he was no longer the golden boy who commanded the natural world. He was a living ghost, a man whose soul remained permanently trapped in the dark with his bride. He retreated deep into the frozen, unforgiving wilderness, far away from the towns and the cheerful, ignorant laughter of mortal men. His music fundamentally changed. He no longer played melodies that made the rivers dance or the flowers bloom. He played only songs of absolute, devastating mourning. The sorrow in his chords was so incredibly profound that the ancient oak trees wept sadly, and the fierce beasts of the forest laid their heavy heads on their paws and howled in sympathetic agony. He completely shunned the company of humanity, particularly the women of Thrace. Many beautiful, noble women tried to woo the legendary musician, hoping to heal his shattered heart. But Orpheus rejected every single advance with a cold, absolute indifference. His heart belonged to a ghost, and he had no love left to give to the living world. His absolute rejection of the world, and specifically his refusal to take another lover, eventually sparked a violent, terrifying rage. The wild, frenzied women of Thrace, known as the Menad worshippers of Dia, the god of wine and madness, felt deeply insulted by his persistent mourning. They saw his eternal devotion to a dead woman as a supreme arrogance, an affront to their own beauty and the vibrant, passionate world of the living. One day, while Orpheus was sitting atop a cold, rocky crag, singing his devastating lament into the biting wind, the Maenads descended upon him. Blinded by a supernatural, wine-soaked fury, they attacked the defenseless musician. The very nature that Orpheus used to command was turned against him in a violent, bloody frenzy. They tore him apart limb from limb, silencing the greatest voice the ancient world had ever known. They threw his severed head and his beloved tortoiseshell lyre into the freezing, rushing waters of the river Heb. But true magic never really dies. As his head floated down the rushing river, eventually drifting out into the vast expanse of the sea, his pale lips continued to move. The lyre, bobbing gently in the waves, strummed itself in the wind. Ebon in death, his voice echoed over the water, murmuring a single, eternal word. Eurydice, the gods of Mount Olympus, deeply moved by the ultimate tragic finale of his life, retrieved his lyre from the sea and placed it high in the night sky, transforming it into the constellation Lyra, ensuring that his music would shine down upon the earth for the rest of human history. But the true ending of the story does not lie in the stars. It lies deep beneath the earth. When Orpheus drew his final, violent breath, his soul was finally freed from the agonizing prison of his mortal body. He descended into the underworld one last time, not as an arrogant, living intruder, but as a rightful shade. He drifted down into the pale, quiet fields of Asphodel, searching frantically through the mists. And there, standing by a quiet, eternal stream, he found her. Eurydice turned, her melancholic eyes widening as she saw the golden boy of Thrace running toward her. Teimbra said, two lost souls, finally reuniting in the quiet eternity of the dark. And as they walked together through the endless, shadowy meadows of the afterlife, a profound, beautiful peace finally settled over them. Because now, walking hand in hand through the abyss, Orpheus could look back at her as many times as he wanted, without ever having to fear losing her again. Have you ever loved someone so deeply you would walk into the darkest depths of the earth just to bring them back? The tragic tale of Orpheus and Eurydice is a devastating reminder of how fragile our human hearts truly are. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Below would you have been able to resist looking back? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the darkest, most beautiful myths in human history. Until next time, keep looking forward.